Hello, and welcome to the first episode of Rock Talk with me, Dr. Cropper. Now, I should preface this by saying that I am in no way, shape, or form a doctor. It's just a catchy name, and because there's going to be a sort of educational bent to this show, think of it like if there was a university course in the sort of stuff that I'm going to be talking about. It's sort of told from that angle, so that's why I called it that. I'm not trying to say that I'm an actual doctor, so uh, right. Now that we've got that out of the way, for this first episode, I thought I would just give you all a little bit of background into my musical journey and how I became interested in the uh, the artists and genres that I'm mainly going to be talking about on this show. So, I guess my musical journey probably started uh, while I was still in the womb. My parents actually saw the Rolling Stones on their Voodoo Lounge tour at the old CNE Stadium in Toronto while my mom was about 2 months pregnant with me. So I was corrupted, if you will, from an early age, uh, or if you even call it age when you're still uh, in anyhow. Um, so both my parents obviously were or are very into music. Most people in my family are. My mom would play more praise and worship stuff, and I used to listen to that a lot with her when I was little. But then the first band that I can remember really hooking me was The Doors. They were certainly my first love. I used to listen to them with my dad, especially the first album, all the time in the car, and Light My Fire, which I referred to as the telephone song then, uh, was and still is to this day my number one favorite song by anybody. Uh, it's just, I don't know exactly what it is. It's just, I mean, it's complex and ambitious while also, at least with the lyrics being relatively simple, but the rhyme scheme is so perfect, and so there's a lot to love about it, no matter how closely you're paying attention. And then also, when my dad lived in Ohio for 10 years, it had great sentimental value to me, and I could listen to it when I missed him and that. So yeah, that's Light My Fire and my interest in the Doors. And actually, my dad took me to see the Doors of the 21st Century, they were called, which was just Ray Manzarek and Robbie Krieger with some other musicians filling in for Jim Morrison, who obviously passed away in 1971, and John Densmore, who elected not to join them on that uh, venture. And that was my first concert, and it was really a fantastic show and an awesome experience with my dad picking me up from school and surprising me, and going down to Ontario Place and killing time before the show, getting fries that the seagulls harassed us for, and going on some little water ride that they had, and then obviously the concert itself being the main attraction. And it really hooked me on live music, which has been a lifelong passion of mine since then. Uh, Shortly the after that, when while I was still very much a Doors fan first and foremost, my dad also showed me a lot of Beatles stuff, which everybody at least respects them. Most people like them to some extent, and they would certainly be in my top five. They I don't have them as highly as excuse me, my dad or my brother or some others would probably like, but Anyhow, I started to get into AC/DC shortly after that. This would be around when I was 10 years old. And of course, every uh, prepubescent boy thinks that Big Balls is the most hilarious song they've ever heard. And I was no exception. It gets progressively less funny, I think, once you're on the wrong side of 14, but thankfully there's other better stuff in their catalog. Um, so I was very into AC/DC at that point when I was 10, and that started my path down towards heavier stuff, which I'll come back to in a minute. Now, I mentioned the Rolling Stones. I uh, I would say I knew mainly only greatest hits at that point. My mom uh, would play them a lot. She "Start Me Up" is her favorite song, which I like. I wouldn't say it's my favorite. A little too greatest hitsy for me. Um, Not that that's an indictment. Uh, Somebody will roast me for that. She would also play "Beast of Burden" quite a bit, which was her dad's favorite Stone song, who passed away before I was born. So I always had a soft spot for "Beast of Burden" because of that. Um, and so, right, we're in 2005 when I'm 10, and the Stones release their Bigger Bang album, which, as I would find out later, is not even close to their best album. But at the time, I thought, hey, it's new music from the Stones, and I lapped it up. And I still really like Rough Justice and think it's a an underrated song that had it come out earlier in their career would be much more highly respected. It has some really clever lines from Mick, and the instrumentation is quite good as well. Um, so I carried on along that trajectory, liking the Doors, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, AC/DC, and a few other uh, assorted bands for the rest of my preteen years. And then as I approached high school and through the first year or two of high school, as I think is true for a lot of people, you start listening to whatever's popular because everybody's trying to fit in at that stage of their life. And in the late 2000s, early 2010s, that was a lot of rap and hip hop and some of the stuff in that sort of vein that came out while I was listening to uh, pop radio at that age. I still like, but I don't listen to those genres very much anymore. And then probably I would say the most transformative experience for me as a listener and what shaped my tastes the most was something that happened in, I want to say February, but it could have been January of I guess it would be 2011 because I was in grade 10, and I was folding or putting laundry away one night in my room, listening to Key 107, the main classic rock station in this part of the world, and Fool in the Rain by Led Zeppelin came on, and I was completely transfixed by the what I would later find out is a variation of a Purdy shuffle that John Bonham plays on that, and just everything about the song. So I stopped putting the clothes away to sit there and uh, wait for them to say who that was when the song finished. And they said Led Zeppelin. Now, I was aware of Led Zeppelin, but not very comprehensively at that point. I had 8 songs of theirs on my little iPod Nano that I got when I was somewhere around, I guess, 11 or 12 probably. And my neighbor, who's uh, 5 or so years older than me, who used to babysit my brother and I, just loaded it up with stuff from his computer. And so he gave me 8 Zeppelin songs. I know Stairway to Heaven was one of them. Communication Breakdown was on there as well, and a couple other of what you would call the usual suspects. And I would listen to it from time to time and really like it, but at that point they were still in that sort of category of people that you listen to every once in a while and really enjoy, and then forget to listen to for maybe even 2 months, and then one day you think, oh hey, I haven't listened to them for a while, and you throw them on and then forget about them again. But after this, I was like, okay, wow, like I don't know how these guys were hidden from me in plain sight for so long, but I am gonna start doing my homework. So I voraciously started soaking up everything I could find about Led Zeppelin and dove headfirst down the rabbit's hole. And it's a journey that's been going on for over 9 years since then. At first, I bought up all of the studio albums and listened to them many times through, and then bought the official live albums and the DVD and everything. And then it still wasn't enough, and I would read things about, like, in lists of top 10 live bands of all time and stuff. They would always be there, but there's very few official live releases of theirs. So I figured there must be something that I'm missing, and sure enough there was. So around the end of grade 11, so about a year after I had my Fool in the Rain discovery, I believe I think it started with just searching like Led Zeppelin Dazed and Confused live uh, in YouTube, and the version that came up was from the fourth night at Earl's Court in London in 1975, which, as it turns out, is the second last time that they played Dazed, and is a very good version. Probably not the best of 75, and probably not top 25 all time, but still very good. And so I watched and thankfully there's video of that, which is probably why that's the one that I clicked when I was searching through YouTube. So I watched that many times, and then thought to myself, like, okay, Zach, you need to force yourself to check out a different version as well. And I clicked in the suggested and watched other songs from Earl's Court as well. But so I probably stayed with 75 first, and then started to branch out. But anyway, that opened up a whole new, weirder and more wonderful rabbit's hole, which is their bootleg recordings, which are necessary if you want to dig deeper when it comes to Zeppelin, because unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, there's very few official live releases of theirs. There's the BBC sessions, How the West was won, The Song Remains the Same, and the DVD that has 5 hours worth of stuff on it, and then the reunion show, and that's basically it. When you compare that to other bands of their stature, and certainly bands of their live stature, it's practically nothing. I mean, the Grateful Dead, by comparison, who I'll get to in a minute, have literally hundreds of official live releases. And beyond that, whatever isn't released live is pretty much available as a soundboard recording, which most of the time is going to sound better than an audience recording, which brings me back to Zeppelin. Not only are the there aren't that many official live recordings, so I start dipping my toes in the bootleg waters, and the first thing that strikes me, besides how good some of the performances are, is how bad the sound quality is on some of these tapes. I thought, like, gosh, I don't know if I'm going to be able to really dig into this stuff. It sounds so bad when you're used to only listening to um, official stuff. And so I don't even know how I stumbled across the resources that are now essential to me for knowing where to look when it comes to this stuff. I think it was probably just a Google search of like best Led Zeppelin show or best Led Zeppelin like live version of Stairway to Heaven or whatever song I would have searched, probably Dazed and Confused. Um, and I stumbled across the official uh, fan forum on, which is like run through ledzeppelin.com, which is a phenomenal resource for bouncing ideas off of each other and gleaning information from people who, especially at that point, but still now, knew much more about this stuff uh, than I do or did. And then I also stumbled across this blog that a fellow did in 2008, where he listened to every Led Zeppelin concert for which there was a recording at that time in a year, basically one per day. For there, I think there was like 267 or 288 at the time that he did it. Anyway, so I stumbled across that site, and he would do a write up about each show as he went along that year, and it's all still there. So I would read those, and that would give me a clue of which shows would be a good starting point. And I ordered. At that point, I didn't realize how you could download them for free, so I found on some site kind of similar to eBay, I don't even remember what it was called, a guy from England selling them, who was really awesome to deal with, Harry Chera, and I got a lot of recordings from him. He would send the discs over via Royal Airmail from England, and there would be like Christmas morning every time I went to the mailbox and see a box from him. I know the first batch of shows that I got were, I know, June 21st, 1977, Los Angeles, the famous Listen to This Eddie show. That's All Right, New York, which is February 12th, 75 at Madison Square Garden. I think March 21st, 75 in Seattle, which is probably my favorite show by them and by extension by anybody. March 27th, 75 in Los Angeles, last night of the tour. And I feel like there were 5. What? The other one might have been June 23rd, 77. For badge holders only. I actually have the Sergeant Page's Badge Holders Club Band title. But no, actually it was June 27th, 77, the last night in LA, which, as I would find out later, is not actually the best, but at the time I always conflated last night in a place with best, which is kind of a loose general rule that you can sometimes follow, but not always. So yeah, it started with those 5, and now I for sure have over 100, maybe over 150 Zeppelin shows in my collection, whether I have the discs or just downloaded it. And I try to listen to them all on the day that they happened, which keeps me busy certain times of year, like May and June, which it is right now. And that So the Zeppelin rabbit's hole in exploring all of the idiosyncrasies of their live history and reading biographies of band members. I've read Plants and Pages, as well as Richard Coles, who was their tour manager. That kept me busy for um, close to 5 years. And then partway through my uh, time at McMaster University here in Ontario, I I discovered the Grateful Dead. Now, when I say discovered, I knew who they were, but had never really listened to them. I tried at one point a few years earlier to get into them because I knew that they played long songs and long shows, which I was a fan of through Zeppelin, and I knew that they improvised a lot. And so I thought, oh, like they're probably somebody I would like. And I had no idea where to start, so I just went to YouTube and searched like Grateful Dead and started typing and so, to see what would come up next. And I think Dark Star was one of the ones that came up. And I thought, oh, okay, that sounds like it's probably a good jam. And then I clicked on it, and the first couple of results were all like over half an hour. So I thought, oh, there we go, it is. And the one that I clicked on, I believe, was November 11th, 73 at Winterland Arena in San Francisco, which is a very good version, but as I would later find out, by late 73, they had been playing it for several years and were really starting to play around with it and playing it in a very jazzy way that could be a bit. It's it's a tough. It's a high barrier of entry for a newcomer to start there. Um, so I put it on and didn't really like it because I think there's a tendency for all of us to uh, be a little bit hesitant to embrace a new sound or artist or song or whatever it is that is too different from what we've heard before to easily categorize it. I think we like when things fit into boxes, even if it's a box that we aren't usually a fan of, if we know what to, like, oh, it's a country song or it's a ballad or it's an up-tempo rocker, that sort of thing. We're comfortable when we know where things fit like that, especially certain personality types. And I think uh, for me, being an INTJ, we can talk about psychology sometime another day, but I especially like categorizing things. And at the time, having never listened to the Grateful Dead or any jam band really, throwing on a 73 Dark Star was just too out there, and I didn't like it and sort of wrote them off and didn't give it another thought for quite a while. And then one summer, while my dad was still living in Ohio, he and I stopped at the Harveys in Windsor, sort of across from University of Windsor. Excuse me. And we went in to get a burger on our way down to Ohio, and this song was on that I thought sounded really cool. And I asked my dad who it was, and he said Grateful Dead, and I found out that it was Touch of Grey, which I now obviously uh, love quite a lot. Um, and then I made like a mental note, you know how you do, like, oh, I gotta check those guys out when I get home or whatever. But because we were on the way to Ohio, I guess it was still like 4 hours from getting there. And then by the time I got down there, seeing my brothers and sisters and stepmom and the dogs and everything, I just got sidetracked and forgot to do it. And who knows, it might have even been months or like a year or two after that when I finally remembered to uh, check out more of their stuff. And this time around, when I looked into them, the first song that I stumbled across really hooked me, and that was Uncle John's Band, which is still one of my favorites of theirs. Probably second to Dark Star, actually, which now I really love. Now that I have the time and proper mindset to embrace it, but yeah, I listened to Uncle John's Band, and it just totally entranced me. Uh, Almost like that Fool of the Rain experience with Zeppelin. Um, just the those pastoral opening chords and the sweet harmonies and everything. It's like sitting around a little psychedelic campfire. And so from there, I listened to, I think, Sugar Magnolia and Ripple, and I really liked those three. And then started to, I knew with them that the live stuff was really where it's at. Like there's a much greater disparity between their live stuff and their studio output. Whereas like Zeppelin, obviously they're a fantastic live band, but their studio albums are, well, like all time great as well. The Grateful Dead, as I would later find out, really only have two studio albums that you would say are like all time greats. Working Man's Dead and American Beauty, both released in 1970. Uh, Excuse me. So I went on iTunes and searched Grateful Dead and started scrolling through the live albums that were available. And uh, the only one that had all three of Uncle John's Band, Sugar Magnolia, and Ripple. And I might have been looking for one that had Dark Star as well, because I might have given it a second chance by that point and liked it a bit better. The only one that had all of those was Ladies and Gentlemen, which is a compilation of their 5 nights at the Fillmore East in New York in April 1971, which were the last shows that they played there before it closed 2 months later. So I bought that, and there's 42 songs on it, and it's almost 5 hours long because it's a mix of the 5 nights, but they basically pick at least one version of every song that was played across the 5 nights. So that was a big mouthful to digest, but I listened to it a bunch of times and really liked it. And then within a few weeks was ready to get another one. And I think the second one I got was Dick's Picks Volume 4, which contains my favorite and, in my opinion, the best version of Dark Star from February 13th, 1970 at the Fillmore East. Just a stunning piece of improvisation and group chemistry and dynamics, and everything's just exactly perfect. It's like the Goldilocks version, if you will. And then I got the Fillmore West 1969 release, and then I think after that, the next one I probably got, apart from Working Man's Dead and American Beauty, the studio albums, uh, was the second show of their Europe 72 tour. I'm not going to go too far into that because I'm going to do a whole episode about that tour, I think, for the next episode. But yeah, I got that one and was, or no, yeah, okay, I got one before that. It was uh, Sunshine Daydream, the August 27th, 1972 show in Oregon, which is very highly thought of amongst deadheads. And those were all fantastic. And anyhow, so I've been, a, I think I was probably a bit more tentative at the start, diving down the Grateful Dead rabbit's hole, and even still, 6 years into it, I seem to have this thing where whenever it's a song of theirs I haven't heard before, or a a year or period of their touring history that I haven't really listened to before, I'm always kind of hesitant of it. Um, and I'm not sure why, because they consistently pleasantly surprise me. And even a song that I thought on the first listen or two I didn't like that much, I end up really appreciating. Uh, Especially if I dig into the meaning of the lyrics. But anyhow, so it's been a bit of a more cautious descent into the deep end with them. But the awesome thing about exploring the Grateful Dead is that the rabbit's hole goes very, very deep. They have much more songs than Zeppelin, and many more available recordings and higher quality recordings. They were around for 30 years compared to 12 for Zeppelin, and toured incessantly much deeper into their career than Zeppelin did. And then as far as the percentage of good recordings available per show, they had a much different approach than Zeppelin did. They It was more communal, and uh, I don't really know how to put it, but they encouraged people to tape their shows, and they even had little sectioned off areas for like tapers sections at their shows where tapers could bring good equipment and know that they were sitting in a part where it wasn't going to get too rowdy and people were going to leave their stuff undisturbed, and they would let people plug directly into the soundboard, which is part of why so many soundboard recordings of theirs exist. And they also professionally recorded a lot of shows, which is why there's so many official releases. So it's like, it's a bit more welcoming if you decide that you're going to start going down the rabbit's hole with them, because at least sound quality isn't another barrier on top of the unknown of like songs and live areas that you haven't heard before. Zeppelin, on the other hand, did not record many of their shows, which was short-sighted in hindsight. But Peter Grant, who was their manager, who was brilliant in a lot of ways, I think handicapped them in this regard, because he was, on the one hand, he was right in that he was adamant that the best way to experience them was in the flesh. So in order to encourage the maximum number of people to do that and go to a concert of theirs, he basically flatly refused having them on TV, and they never released a single in the UK and only released a couple in the States. But anyway, that attitude also carried over into his approach to bootleg recorders at their concerts. He wasn't just not encouraging it like the Grateful Dead did, he actively discouraged it and would destroy people's equipment if he caught them taping their shows, which resulted in tapers, for the most part, having to bring much smaller and inferior equipment to record Zeppelin shows so that they could smuggle it in their shirt or whatever they had to do. The one notable exception to that is a guy named Mike Millard, who will come up, I'm sure, in later episodes. He recorded a lot of Zeppelin and Queen, Pink Floyd, Stones, and other people's shows in Los Angeles primarily, and sometimes he would go to ones in San Diego. in the 70s, and he was ingenious in that he pretended to be in a wheelchair so that he could bring in really good equipment and cover it with a blanket under his legs, and also be given priority seating because of his air quotes handicap, which is obviously not a very politically correct or kind thing to do, I guess, but those of us in the Zeppelin community are very grateful to him for it, because it means that we have really high quality audience recordings of some of their best shows because they loved playing in LA. So anyhow, if you haven't noticed already, Zeppelin and Grateful Dead are Led Zeppelin is my favorite band, uh, and Grateful Dead maybe our second at this point. It's been the Stones in the two spot for a long time. I'm not sure if the Dead have passed them, but anyhow, uh, I listen to much more of their live recordings than the Stones, because the Stones don't improvise nearly as much, so there isn't as much variety to make it worthwhile collecting a bunch of shows. Certainly not from the same year. Uh, so all of that to say, this show is mostly going to focus, I think, at this point at least, on Led Zeppelin and Grateful Dead live history, because that's what I know the most about. Um, that may be subject to change. Uh, also, I guess I should mention why Led Zeppelin are my favorite. Um, there's just something incredibly powerful about their music. It just sounds like raw, unbridled energy and bravado and virtuosity, and it's really quite intoxicating at times. Just today, I was listening to their second show in New York in 1972, and during Dazed and Confused, I almost like choked on my chips that I was eating. It just like hit me all over again, like it was the first time hearing them. And nobody else makes me feel quite that way, no matter how much I like their stuff. Uh, there's just something different about how Zeppelin's music hits you in the gut and totally arrests your attention. And Grateful Dead are quite different in that respect. Their music's just sort of floats there off to the side and slowly draws you in, and you can sort of float in and out. Both uh, good in different ways, as far as that's concerned. Um, I'm not. I don't think I have anything more to say about all of. Oh, okay. I'll stop talking about my influences, but I will quickly mention my own personal uh, musical career, if you can call it that. I'm a drummer. I started playing while banging on pots and pans when I was before I could walk, and then I got my first little toy kit when I was 3 or 4, and then a real kit for Christmas when I was 8, and started taking lessons at that point. Stopped when I was 14 and didn't really play them too much. The first 2.5 years of high school, then I started to get back into it, and uh, maybe at some point during my first year in university, excuse me, I really got back into playing and took it much more seriously than I had when I was younger, taking lessons, and started to finally make some traction and get reasonably good. And I decided that I would really like to start a band, which had been a dream of mine when I was, 10 or 12. And uh, I had kind of forgotten about it. And so I talked about it for a year or two and wasn't entirely sure how to go about doing it. And also, one of the things with my personality, I guess, I'm always hesitant to get into action. I'm always thinking, like, oh, I'm not quite ready yet. We need to get more prepared, more prepared, more prepared. And then one day I was like talking about it to my dad, like, oh, it'd be so cool once I have a band. And he said, why don't you stop talking about it and do it? And I thought, like, oh, well, I don't really have a good answer to that. But it was just the kick in the pants that I needed. So I made a poster and plastered it all over the basement of the student center at McMaster. Had no idea that you're supposed to get posters approved by the student union, but they stayed up long enough for a few people to text me back. And about a month or so later, because it was around exam times, we had our first rehearsal in May of 2016. And my dad brought my younger brother down to play guitar, and we started a band. And the lineup changed a little bit, but my brother and I were the two constants throughout, and we were together for a little over 3 years, and it was a really fantastic experience, especially for somebody pretty introverted like me to force yourself out of your shell to that extent and get up on stage in front of people who you don't know and some who you do know, which can sometimes be even more nerve-wracking. And uh, especially when we started to play originals and you're exposing something that personal as lyrics you've written a lot of times about some romantic thing, exposing those to the world, it's a scary thing. But then when they're received well, it suddenly flips to a euphoric feeling, and you get kind of hooked on that, and just the feeling of being on stage and the energy exchange between the band and the crowd. And I really wanted to do that for a career, and I was committed to it, and my brother was. I think sometimes maybe uh not everybody in the group was on the same page that way. I could be wrong, but anyhow, we just lived too far apart, all of us, and uh none of us at the time had cars of our own, and it just became too hard to continue progressing. It's kind of plateaued with the amount that we were able to practice, and throw in some artistic differences and a couple bruised egos, and it was over a little over a year ago. So I went back to school this past year for public relations at Sheridan College here, and finished that, and then was supposed to be doing an internship in something this summer when the coronavirus exploded onto the scene and forced us all into our homes for a while. So I thought, why not use this time productively and start this podcast? I had been told for a couple of years actually that I had a good voice for radio, which is better than being told you have a face for radio. And I thought, like, yeah, that wouldn't be so bad, because my grandma's always saying, like, oh, you should be a teacher, you should be a teacher. And that doesn't really appeal to me as far as like everything that goes into being a teacher, but the lecturing itself, I think, could be kind of cool, but only if there existed courses in something that I'm really passionate about, which unfortunately for me is basically only music and sports. And also, they don't just let anybody teach a university class, even if there were programs in Led Zeppelin and Grateful Dead history. So I had to settle for giving little lectures to myself while I was walking the dog. And then one day I just thought, hey, we learned how to do podcasting in school this year. Why don't I order a microphone and do it? So here we are. I think that concludes this first episode. I'm sorry that I was a little bit rambling and scattered. I think future episodes that have a clearer focus should be easier for you to follow. So I hope you will stick with it. Thank you so much for stopping by, and I'll see you next time. Class dismissed.